And the first satellite in that caravan is from the United Arab Emirates. It's called Hope, and it's the Emirates Mars mission. And that mission, if it successfully gets to Mars and gets into Martian orbit, will be only the second time in the history of humanity that a nation has made it to Mars on their first attempt successfully. And not even the United States did that. The failure rate for going to Mars is pretty high, but only India prior to now made it on the first attempt. And they were like the United Arab Emirates, they were a big partner of the United States. The second in line is the Chinese. And then the third in line is the United States with our second big Mars rover. Keep your eyes tuned out, because that should come about in February of next year. So let's talk a little bit about the things that are going to enable us to actually move from Earth on out back to the moon, and then eventually onto Mars. We constantly ask ourselves three questions today. One is, are we alone here in the universe? Or is there other life? Are there other habitable planets around? And if there are, is there life on any of these habitable planets? One of the reasons we really like Mars is because Mars has, we think, the building blocks for life. It once was a planet not unlike Earth, and we think it may have been habitable at one time. It's pretty cold now. It has an atmosphere that's mostly carbon dioxide, so it's not the kind of place that you want to go and decide you're going to live the rest of your life. But it's not much unlike you would find, say, if you wanted to go down to Antarctica, the way that we do research down there today. So let's see. People ask a lot, what's it like when you go to space? And particularly kids, they all want to know. And so I tell them there are two senses that I like to highlight that help me describe what it's like to go to space. One of those senses is the sense of sight, the sense of vision. So this slide, while it probably looks pretty impressive to you, it is nowhere close to what you really see with the human eye as you look out the window of your spacecraft. And this is one of the pictures that was taken by me and my crew back on my second space shuttle mission, long time ago, on the mission in which we deployed the Hubble Space Telescope. This is an image of a portion of the Middle East. You're actually looking at northeastern Egypt with the Nile River running through up to the Nile River Delta, the Sinai Peninsula, and then with the Red Sea in between it, and then the Gulf of Aqaba. And you're looking at a number of nations, the western part of Saudi Arabia, Jordan. Under the clouds a little bit is Israel. And if I had taken this picture a few seconds later, you would have begun to see Iran and Iraq and other nations of the Middle East. But this gives you a feel for what it looks like when you're in low Earth orbit, looking back at our planet. I'll kind of call your attention, if you look carefully, this is a daytime picture. We go around Earth once every 90 minutes, and we travel at about 17,500 miles an hour in low Earth orbit. For those of you who are from countries that use a metric system, it's about 23,000 kilometers per hour. So 45 minutes of daylight, 45 minutes of darkness. This is during that 45-minute daylight period. And so you may be wondering, why don't I see any stars up in the part that's dark? And it's because our sun is so bright, so overwhelmingly bright, that it just takes away the ability of the human eye to discern stars when you're on the daylight side of Earth. If you look very carefully, though, between the darkness and Earth, you'll see a very thin blue line. And I mean really thin blue line. That's our atmosphere. And I'm going to talk about that a couple of times during our talk today. Our sponsoring agency here, or sponsoring organization, the Satellite Professionals Institute, they spend their whole careers building satellites that enable us to take images like this, but also to help us understand our own atmosphere and what's going on with it. How do we preserve it, and what can we do to stop the deterioration that's going on as a result of climate change, extreme climate change, or global warming, as some people call I want to show you, we believe that it's really important to have diversity, inclusion, and equity in a successful organization. NASA has done a lot to try to do that. So with this video, very quickly, I'm just going to show you the progress that we feel we've made over the number of years now. Hopefully one of the things I hope you noticed during that is that you saw a lot of astronauts, but that's not all you saw. You saw women in all professions. You saw accountants, lawyers, scientists, doctors, dietitians, you name it. NASA is a huge organization and it has someone in just about every field imaginable. And we're really working hard to make sure that the number of women and the number of minorities increases steadily. This is the International Space Station, taken from an approaching vehicle. But we've been living and working on the International Space Station now for more than 20 years. We just earlier this month celebrated our 20th anniversary of human habitation at the International Space Station. It's put together by a conglomerate of 5 different organizations, NASA representing the United States, the European Space Agency, or ESA, that has 22 member nations, Russia, represented by its space agency Roscosmos, Japan with its space agency JAXA, and Canada and the Canadian Space Agency. The International Space Station, like I said, it's been there 20 years. Lots of science goes on it. And it's sort of the home away from home for astronauts. A typical stay on the International Space Station is 6 months. We have had one American, Scott Kelly, who lived on the station for a year. And we had one young lady, Christina Koch, that you saw in the montage of pictures, who was kind of laying on her back in a spacesuit with glasses on. Christina came back last year from having spent a year on the International Space Station. But station's a machine, and like any machine, its time is about to run out. So its lifetime, we think it can go till maybe 2028, maybe a few years beyond. But we're busily now working with our international partners to find a way to transition work in low Earth orbit from onboard the International Space Station to commercial platforms. And we'll talk a little bit more about them as we go along. What goes on the station? We do lots of experiments, lots of scientific experiments. And one of the big things about the way that NASA operates today is that NASA no longer builds and owns and operates its own spacecraft for transportation to and from space. We rely on the commercial sector to do that. What we do is we train and we carry astronauts from America and our partner nations to the International Space Station to embark on science and engineering and scientific and technological discoveries. This is me on my very last space shuttle mission, again, many, many years ago. This was the first joint Russian-American mission. And we actually had a Russian cosmonaut, Sergei Krikalev, who was my crew member. Today, Sergei remains my friend after 20 some odd years, and his job is to run the human spaceflight program for Russia. So it gives you an idea of the diplomacy that we're able to conduct through our work in space. The gentleman drawing my blood right now is Franklin Chang Diaz, the guy in the yellow shirt. Born and raised in San Jose, Costa Rica, decided when he was a kid, he needed to come to the United States to become an astronaut. He told his dad, when he was 12 that he was going to the US. And his father said, for what? He said, I'm going to be an astronaut. And his dad said, yeah, get back to school and talk to me when you graduate from high school. And sure enough, Franklin went on, graduated from high school, told his dad it was time to come to the US. And his father finally gave up, sent him to a place called Hartford, Connecticut. And he had a friend who was an engineer there, sent a note and said, this is my son, Franklin, about whom you've heard me talk often. He has $50 in his pocket. Humor him for as long as you can. And when you grow weary, send him back home to me. Franklin enrolled himself in the University of Connecticut, went on to get a degree, almost flunked out the first year, but went on to graduate with honors, and then went to MIT and earned a doctorate, a PhD in plasma physics, and today is one of the world's foremost plasma physicists. And he is also the founder or the inventor of a plasma fusion rocket engine called VASIMR that, if all goes well, within the next decade will be helping to get us to and from one place in space much faster than we do today. It takes us 8 months to go to Mars today with chemical propulsion. With Franklin's engine, we think we can cut that in half, if not even faster. So lots of stuff going on.
Right.
That's Scott Kelly. He's the American who spent a year in space with his Russian counterpart. So, in order to do some of the research that we want to do, we've been looking for planets, I mentioned earlier, planets that are like our Earth and may actually be able to sustain life. And the Hubble Space Telescope has opened up incredible vistas to us, has allowed us to rewrite textbooks on astronomy and astrophysics. This is the next big, great observatory. It's the James Webb Space Telescope. It's been delayed a couple of times, but hopefully it'll get launched here in late next year or early 2022. The big difference between James Webb and every other telescope before it is it's got a segmented mirror. So you can see it's got 18 different cells. Like these are all folded up in a shroud in the nose cone of a launch vehicle when it goes to space. And then once it gets there, they open it up and it'll fly out to about 1.5 million kilometers away from Earth, to a point that essentially has no gravity, because it's in a point where the Earth, the moon, and Earth's moon gravity balance each other out. It's called a Lagrange point. So that's where the James Webb Space Telescope will be kind of camped out, and hopefully will help us to discover even more than we've got several thousand, about 2,000 now, what we call exoplanets, planets that we found around other suns, around other stars, in other galaxies and solar systems that we think are just close enough to their own sun that they may be able to harbor life, just like our sun harbors life here on Earth. Let's look at some of the spacecraft that take people and things to space today. And these are now the result, for the most part, of partnerships, either with industry or with our international partners. This is Cygnus. It's a spacecraft built originally by a small company called Orbital Sciences that has its facility right outside of Washington, D.C. at Dulles Airport. It's now Northrop Grumman, so they were bought out, but this is the original Orbital Cygnus. It's one of the largest cargo carriers we have. So it carries cargo to the International Space Station. You can see the robotic arm that's reaching out. It grabs it and then pulls it in and attaches it to the station. The next spacecraft is one that's very well known to everybody. This is the SpaceX Dragon. It was actually the first commercially produced vehicle that went into space, came back and landed successfully. And then just this past weekend, we flew a derivative of this called the Crew Dragon that carried our first operational crew of four NASA astronauts, three NASA astronauts and one JAXA astronaut to the International Space Station. And they'll live on station for the next 6 months, having been carried there by SpaceX Dragon. This is our old standby, the Russian Soyuz. This is a very old crew vehicle. We flew this from 2003, after we lost the Columbia spacecraft, until we started flying the SpaceX Crew Dragon. So we were dependent upon the Russians to get us to space, but that was something we consciously did. We wanted to finish building the International Space Station, so we took NASA crews on board the shuttle, 7 people to do the construction work on the International Space Station, while the operating crews, 3 at a time, went up on Soyuz. So that's the Soyuz. This is a Japanese HTV. It's another cargo vessel. And this is the largest cargo vessel that we have today. Like the Northrop Grumman Cygnus, it requires the remote manipulator system or the mechanical arm to reach out and grab it, and then the astronauts bring it in. Actually, the astronauts don't bring it in. The astronauts grapple it, and then they turn it over to Houston, to the people on the ground. And the crew, the flight controllers on the ground actually operate the arm and bring satellites in nowadays and actually birth them to the International Space Station. So that's the cooperation between the crew and the ground. And then the next vehicle I'm going to show you is one of my favorites. It hasn't flown yet, but this is made by a company out of Colorado called Sierra Nevada, and it's called the Dream Chaser. Dream Chaser is under contract to fly for NASA sometime next year, sometime in 2021. Initially, it will carry cargo, but it's built to be a crew transport vehicle, can carry up to 7 people. Comes back and lands on a runway, and that, as a pilot, I like it because there's a big thrill to being able to bring your spacecraft back to Earth and land it on a runway. So those are some of the vehicles that we use today. This one is a little bit different. This is Virgin Galactic's Spaceship Two. Spaceship Two has been to space with people a couple of times now. What makes it unique is that it's carried to space underneath a carrier aircraft that drops it off, it ignites its rocket engine, and then pulls up and zooms up into space. It's what we call a suborbital flight vehicle. So it doesn't go around Earth the way that the International Space Station and Soyuz and the SpaceX Crew Dragon and others do. It just goes into space, turns around, comes right back down. So about a 20-minute flight in space is its maximum duration. It's very much like we used when Alan Shepard went to space as the first American to fly. But the Spaceship Two is slated to carry its first paying passengers sometime early next year, we hope. Here is where we are today. Now, this is the way we get crew members to and from space today. On the left, the SpaceX Crew Dragon. Resilience is the name of the one that's there right now. It just docked a Sunday night. Actually docked Monday night. And it's pretty much an autonomous vehicle that can fly itself, but its crew members on board can also operate it if need be. And they have touchscreen controls and no hand controllers, no nothing, like old guys like me who fly airplanes that had hand controllers and the like. This is all Buck Rogers stuff. On the right is an artist's conception of the Boeing CST-100 approaching and for docking to the International Space Station. We've flown it once without a crew. It did not successfully complete its test mission. So Boeing is going to fly it again on an uncrewed mission early next year, and then hopefully fly their first crewed demonstration later in 2021, and then begin to fly for profit as an operational carrier of crew like the SpaceX Dragon. As we venture out to Mars, conceptually, what NASA and its international partners want to do is have an orbiting platform, and this they call the Gateway. So it's called the Lunar Orbit Gateway. It's in orbit around our moon, and whoops, I think I took us back one. Let me go back. It's in orbit around the moon, and what happens is you can see the Orion crew module, which is a NASA-owned crew vehicle that will launch on a heavy lift launch vehicle called Space Launch System, or SLS. But the Orion crew vehicle goes up, docks with the Gateway. Its crew gets off, stays on Gateway in preparation for going down to the surface of the moon, or if they're going on to Mars, they'll stay on Gateway and prepare everything they need and get on another vehicle and make the transit to Mars over an 8-month period of time. So that's the Lunar Orbit Gateway that sort of allows us to go from low Earth orbit to lunar orbit, and then either down to the surface of the moon or onto Mars or other destinations. I don't want to forget about this, because NASA's heritage is airplanes. NASA is a descendant of an old organization that used to be called the National Advisory Committee on Aeronautics. And we formed that organization when America found that it was falling behind other countries in the world in terms of making airplanes after the Wright brothers invented the airplane. But nobody in the US seemed to be very interested in it. The Europeans struck off and started building airplanes for the military and everything else. And so the federal government formed the NACA, and these are some of the concepts of modern day airplanes, experimental airplanes that NASA is working on. My favorite is the one up top with the spike nose. It's an artist concept of an aircraft, a research vehicle we call Quest. It's a quiet supersonic transport that Lockheed Martin and NASA partnered on, and we're hoping that it'll fly in a few years. The big deal with Quest is that when it goes supersonic, it doesn't break windows on the ground. It actually, because of the shape of the airfoil, the acoustic energy that comes off it, the sound energy that comes off it normally breaks windows, comes off in a very modulated manner, such that on the ground, people just kind of hear a mild rumble. The other one that's already getting ready to fly is Maxwell. It's an experimental airplane down on the bottom left, and it's an all-electric airplane. This version has about 14 electric propellers on it. You say, why that many? It's a research vehicle, so they decided they wanted that many. But that's a little bit of what NASA does in terms of aeronautics. And then as we get ready to close out with the slides, I wanted to show you this one, because this is the eye opener. Remember at the very beginning, I showed you Earth's atmosphere, how thin it is, and how we say it's fragile, but I say, no, it's not. We're the fragile ones. We depend on the atmosphere to keep us alive. That's where we get our oxygen. That's what sustains life. When our atmosphere goes away, we go away. Earth will still be here for billions more years, as it already has been, but it will not have human inhabitants. We'll go the way of the great dinosaur. So I'm going to start this. This is time-lapse photography from imagery from satellites over a little bit more than the past 100 years. But what you're seeing is the accumulation of carbon dioxide and actually the temperature, the surface temperature of Earth. You can probably guess it, but yellow is warm, red would be hot, and these are above norms. So back in 1880, when we started, we were pretty okay, but watch what happens over time. And this is the initially slow, but then during the industrial age, the rapid accumulation of carbon dioxide and other what we call greenhouse gases that have trapped heat in our atmosphere and caused our atmosphere to heat up immensely. The other thing we see is that the ocean begins to heat up, and it's hotter today than it's ever been before. And that's why we see the severe hurricanes and the severe weather that we have. So this is our planet today. It's a cooker, and we've got to do something about it or we won't survive. So that's my little piece of advice to all of you. And then finally, I talked about NASA's focus on diversity, inclusion, and equity. Some of you saw the movie Hidden Figures. It was written about women who worked at the Langley Research Center in the early days of NASA. back when, before we had IBM computers, and they were called human computers. Their experience was documented in the book and then the movie Hidden Figures. And the young lady, and she is no longer with us. This is Katherine Johnson, who passed away this year at the age of 101. But Katherine Johnson was one of the original human computers, and she did the calculations that enabled John Glenn to get to and from space successfully, and worked at NASA right through the beginning of the Space Shuttle program, but was one among the many women who did manual calculations to get us to and from space. So I think we can move into questions and answers. And I think, Michael, are you gonna moderate?
I am indeed. So for everybody, if you could use the chat facility for this, there's going to be a couple of ways to do this. I think we have our first question here, General Bolden, from Jack Linder, who is a very active member of the SMPTE group and has been in SSPI for many years, the Southeast chapter here as well. His question is, from the station orbiting the moon, what will be able to go, sorry, it moved up. What will the lunar lander look like? Will it be reusable?
Very good question. We think they will be reusable because that's what most of the commercial providers are tending to move toward nowadays, is reusability to keep the cost down. However, I think what you'll find, at least what we think, is the vehicle will go from either from the lunar orbit gateway down to the surface and back up to the lunar orbit gateway, but it won't be a vehicle that comes all the way back to Earth orbit anymore, the way we did back in the Apollo era when the astronauts launched from the surface of the moon and then came back and discarded the lunar lander once they got back to Earth orbit. But yes, we think they will be reusable, but they'll never come back to Earth. They'll just go back and forth from lunar orbit down to the surface.
Very good. There's a question from, which was actually before Jack's, from Richard Barrell. Does the mechanical arm reduce the amount of propellant required to precisely match the cargo craft's velocity to the station in order to dock them? That's a very engineering question right there.
No, it doesn't. Actually, the propellant is used to get the vehicle within what we call the bubble around the International Space Station, where it can either do its own docking or it can be burst. So once you get it to its staging position, which is about 100 meters or so away from the station, it's in a stable hover. And you really don't use very much propellant after that.
It's from Gene Mikulka.
Mm-hmm.
With the change of administrations, do you anticipate any drastic changes in US space policy? And do you see Artemis going into any trouble, or do you think we have a sustainable and stable pathway and the new folks on the Hill will see it that way? He says, thank you.
I'm gonna take a chance here. I am not a member of the Biden transition team or anything like that, but we are on the same path that NASA and the nation have been on over the last 3 or 4 presidencies. We've made some changes, like the Artemis program replaced what used to be called Constellation, that came from the George W. Bush administration. We went from 2 vehicles, Ares 1 and Ares 2, that were intended to take us to the moon and then on to Mars, to a single vehicle, SLS, with 1 vehicle, Orion. But I don't see any dramatic change between the Trump administration and the Biden administration in terms of an exploration goals. Mars will remain the horizon destination, and we'll go back to the moon. When we get there, will probably be a little bit later in this decade, not 2024. But I'm not one who believed 2024 was ever achievable for humans going back to Mars without a lot of money. And so I think end of the decade for humans to Mars, to the moon surface, to the lunar surface, and then on to Mars with humans getting there in the late 2030s. So we'll see humans to Mars in the next decade.
Well, we have a question from Laura Forsick. Do you have any thoughts on how language may evolve in space as space stations become even more international? This is in reference to an Expedition 1 crew interview that was apparently done today on the ISS.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to see a change in language as we know it. What you will find is there will always be conventions of what's the language of choice, the official language of, for example, on the International Space Station, the official language is English. So every crew member can speak English. However, because since 2003, we all went to space, went to the International Space Station on the Russian Soyuz spacecraft, and we were all crew members. Every astronaut, no matter what country they came from, had to learn Russian. So everybody became fluent in Russian so that you could be a crew member to operate a Russian spacecraft. So I don't see any change in language. Astronauts today, because they talk to experimenters on the ground around the world, some of them speak multiple languages, and some of them communicate with the principal investigators in the native tongue of the principal investigator. So on any given day, you might hear French, German, Spanish, Russian, English, any number of languages going on the International Space Station between the station and the ground.
That's right. I have another question here, which was addressed in the chat to everybody, but I think it's a good question. And I know with the title of the presentation today, and you talked about this at the Symposium on Space Innovation, the question is, could you highlight specific areas of research that are essential to continue pursuing or are essential in pursuing solving issues that might arise in preparing for the Martian exploration?
Yeah, there are numerous challenges to going to Mars. Most of the medical challenges we feel we've met. The most daunting medical challenge today is how do we deal with radiation? Because once you get outside Earth's magnetosphere, you're no longer protected from the radiation of the sun and other planets and the like. But we think we've got, between shielding in the spacecraft and other measures, the real solution for the threat from radiation is speed. And so that's why I talked about us looking forward to having nuclear propulsion or Franklin's plasma fusion engine. The other thing that used to be, in fact, could be debilitating if not managed well, was muscle loss and bone loss. So you have what is commonly called muscle atrophy. Anybody who's ever had a cast on knows that when you get out of your cast, your muscles have shrunk, your arms smaller or your legs smaller or whatever it is. That was a huge problem in the early space flight days because the most important muscle in the body is the heart. And we did not want the heart to become weak during any period of time on orbit. So today, astronauts have a very strict exercise regimen. They work out every single day for at least an hour. They also have food supplements, so their diet is prepared so as to help them with bone density, to help them maintain their muscle mass, and then if necessary, they have medicinal material that can help. Every day they log all of their food and drink. It goes down to the ground for analysis at night, and the next day the dietitians and the docs say, okay, you need some more calcium, or you need some more iron, or you need some more exercise on the heavyweight device, the resistive device. So, studying diseases like osteoporosis. Today, one of the things that we're looking at is we do a lot of work with the eyeball, because the eye loses its spherical shape when it goes into space. When you go into space, gravity having been overcome, it kind of takes on an oval shape. Some astronauts have a loss of some of their visual acuity, so they take multiple pairs of glasses, guessing what they're going to need when they're there. Most of the time, it's corrected when they come back to Earth. We look at, in fact, today there is an astronaut on the station, Dr. Kate Rubens, who is she's an infectious disease doctor, actually, who has been studied in Africa, studying Ebola and HIV/AIDS. And on her first flight on the International Space Station, actually performed the first gene sequencing in space. So studying of the omics, genomics, and a lot of other omics has become a very popular research field on the International Space Station. We're looking at working with the Alzheimer's Association, looking at some of the causes or maybe cures for Alzheimer's. So there are innumerable experiments that go on the International Space Station that are really targeted at helping us back here on the planet, not just astronauts in space.
Very good. General Bolden, I have another one. This is from one of our colleagues up at the Mid-Atlantic chapter of SSPI, Val Venera, and hers is a nice different aspect of questions. What was the most unexpected feeling of being out of space for the first time?
Oh, that's a most unexpected feeling. That's interesting. I'm a very emotional person. And so on my very first mission, as an African American, I had taken a lot of time to study the geography of Africa because I wanted to be able to look down on the African continent and look at some of the countries from which my ancestors may have come. So I had the map of Africa almost memorized. And at 17,500 miles an hour, it takes you about 15 minutes to go from Cape Canaveral to the African continent. And, you know, as I kind of unstrapped and leaned forward in the front window, and I saw this big island coming up. And then I all of a sudden realized that big island was the continent of Africa. And so I started looking for these lines on the surface of Africa, and they weren't there. I couldn't tell Nigeria from Algeria, as far apart as they are on the continent, other than knowing about where they were geographically. You know, I was stuck, not being able to determine anything. So I was overwhelmed by the fact that I suddenly realized that we lived on a single planet. We were all the same. There were no lines or borders down here on the planet, in spite of what we had been taught. And so for me, that was an emotional experience that actually caused me to weep. And so that was the most unexpected thing for me, was just to find out how much we are more alike than we are different, looking at this planet from space.
Very good. Daryl, do you have a question?
Yes, we have a question from Andrea Lloyd. How do we keep the public interested in space in order to later achieve a goal of getting humans to Mars instead of the waning interest like the Apollo days?
Is that from Andrea?
Yes.
Okay, Andrea, you know that I got bad news for you. The American public, our attention span is not, I don't think it's going to improve. You know, we do spectacular things in space, and so there will be people who are space enthusiasts, and they'll be with us from beginning to end. There are others, of the vast majority of people in our country, just they don't have an attention span that's very good. So other than a trick now and then, you know, it's I think when we send the first humans back to the moon, that will garner attention. I'm glad that she mentioned the fact that even in the Apollo era, interest waned almost immediately after Neil Armstrong and you know, and Buzz Aldrin landed on the moon. So Apollo never enjoyed an overwhelming amount of popularity and support from the American public. It was the international public that was blown away by it, and that tends to be the same today. It's the countries that don't have the capability to do what we do that really appreciate what we do and what we have the capability to do.
Very good. Steve, do you have a question lined up?
I got a question from Snigna Nalutla, who asked, out of all the experiments you have conducted in space, which do you believe are the most impactful for you and most potential to open research?
Snigna, a number of us have participated in experiments on the immune system. And so for me, being able to use my body to help us understand a little bit more about the human immune system than we knew before, I find spectacular. There's still so much, though, that we do not know about it. The human immune system, when you get into a microgravity environment, it begins to kind of shut itself down. It decreases in its ability to function. And in the space shuttle era, because we only flew 16 days, was about the longest you could fly on the shuttle, until we got to the International Space Station in 6-month missions. We thought that the immune system would just continue to deteriorate and eventually would just shut itself off in the microgravity environment of space. But living for 6 months on the International Space Station, we found that, like most things, the immune system goes through a cyclic change. It begins to deteriorate in its ability to function when you first get into space. And then over a week or two, it begins to recover, it swings back through and becomes hypersensitive in some human beings. And then gradually it just kind of meters itself out and goes back to normal. But studies of the human immune system, studies of the brain that we do nowadays, studies, DNA studies and RNA studies under the genomics umbrella, looking at the human body and its ability to accommodate or to adapt to environments that are different than what we have here on Earth, the way we found to keep ourselves strong. Astronauts who leave the planet today and go to space sometimes come back and they're in better physical condition than they were when they left. That was not the case back in the early days of shuttle, before we got all of the exercise apparatus and the diets and everything that we have today.
So Michael, do we have time for another question?
Yes, we do.
This question is from Jose Torres. In terms of distance, the moon is easier and less expensive for humans to access. So why aren't we racing to colonize the moon instead of Mars?
Well, Jose, let me give you an opinion that you may not like. We're not racing to colonize anything. You know, people use the term colonization, and I think they use it very loosely. Colonization, which has a bad connotation anyway for some Americans, people who were here when we first came, that's not a good word, but colonization implies that you're going to be able to go out and grow crops and you're going to be able to raise a family and the like. Neither the moon nor Mars is hospitable to human beings. I mentioned the moon has no atmosphere. So that's the primary reason that we've never looked at colonizing, quote unquote, the moon. We'll have habitats there, and they will be research facilities, much like we have in Antarctica today with McMurdo Station. And we'll do basically the same thing on Mars. But human beings going and transferring their citizenship to Mars, I don't see that happening. And to be quite honest, I hope it doesn't happen, because one of the great things about being an explorer and going to places where humans have never been before is the opportunity to come back and share that experience with humanity, to let them know what's out there and why they should seek to do the same thing that you just did. So I think it would be selfish of us to send a whole group of human beings away from Earth to go live on Mars forever, and the rest of us never learn about it or never get enticed to want to follow in their footsteps.
General Bolden, if I can ask a maybe more a question with a bit of levity to it.
Yes.
And I know, like, every minute is accounted for in things you have to do on the space station and the space shuttle. Were there ever times where people needed a laugh and played practical jokes on each other? Is there one you can share with us, or is that not such a thing?
No, it happens all the time. Crews are always joking. And I mean, you know, life on the International Space Station is like life down here. You try to make it as much like life on Earth as you can for normal kinds of things. Everybody has their own cubicle in which they sleep. In that cubicle is their laptop, whatever musical device they want, whether it's, I'm not sure what kids use today. It's probably just do it on their iPhone or whatever. but astronauts take their own music. Some take musical instruments. It's not unusual. In fact, just about all the time we have some musical instrument or more on board. So they'll make a band and they'll play. They have a good time, and they do play practical jokes on each other.
Could you give us an example of one?
I'm not a practical jokester. I'm not a very funny person, so I never did it. But oh, I can tell you one. On my very first flight, my commander was another pilot like me, another test pilot by the name of Robert Hoot Gibson. He was a Navy test pilot, and I was a Marine. And we flew with oh, let me see, three PhDs, one astrophysicist, one astronomer, and one laser physicist. In fact, it was Franklin Chang Diaz, the plasma physicist. And we used to always give them a hard time about being so smart. And so we were up on the flight deck, and we were both in our seats one day doing some checkouts right after we got on orbit. And when we turned around to move to float back off out of our seats to the aft section of the flight deck, they had taken some gray tape and had put gray tape across the back of our seats and had written on the gray tape, zone of ignorance for the two pilots on the crew compared to the PhDs and everything. So they thought that was funny. We didn't think it was very funny.
I see. I like it.
So let me thank you all for hosting tonight and for giving me an opportunity to meet with your members and the guests that you have in. It's been a real pleasure for me. You know, I'll leave you with a plea, and it's a sort of a story, a true story about a little boy from a place called KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa, and his name was Nkosi Johnson. And Nkosi was born to a woman who was suffering from the disease AIDS. You weren't expected to live very long with AIDS, and especially in South Africa, where the president really didn't believe that it was a true disease and kind of scoffed at it. And Nkosi spent his very short life. He died at the age of 12, but he spent that life crusading to find a cure for AIDS. And he traveled all over the world with his foster mother, a lady by the name of Gail Johnson, and appeared before the UN and everything. An American writer named Jim Wooten heard about Nkosi, and he said, I've got to meet this kid. So he flew to South Africa, and he met him, and he said he could not believe it. Nkosi, in spite of all of his pain and everything, he was always smiling, always barking out orders for people to do other things for other people. Never asked a question about himself, never cried out in pain. And so Jim said he came back and he wrote a small book about Nkosi called We Are All the Same, because when he asked Nkosi, why do you do what you do? He said, I may be Black, I may be poor, I may have AIDS, but in this world, we are all the same. And just before Nkosi died, Jim Wooten got word that he was about to pass away, and he flew back to South Africa one last time. And he met with Nkosi, and he said he was still barking out orders on his deathbed. At the age of 12, he weighed less than 40 pounds, and he was skin and bones, pus and sores all over his body. And he said, Jim stopped him. He said, Nkosi, stop, you know, you're gonna die. And he said, Nkosi looked up at him and he smiled. He said, yep. He said, but you could die today. And he said, yep. And he said, okay, I don't understand it. Why do you do what you do? And he said, well, Jim, you do all you can with what you have in the time that you have in the place that you are. So I would appeal to all of your members and everybody in the audience, particularly in this very, very, very difficult time, that we do all we can with what we have in the time that we have in the place that we are. God bless all of you, and thank you so very much.
Hey, so Michael, I'd like to also take this time to thank our acting president, Michael Greenwood, who actually very fastidiously went through the coordination and the detail of arranging and coordinating for General Bolden to be here today. And I think behind the scenes, if you saw all the emails and all the coordination with his assistant, he did a lot of things to help make this happen. And we appreciate you doing that for the Space and Satellite Professionals International Southeast Chapter. Thank you, Michael.
Well, thank you very much. I think we're patting ourselves on the back here, but we deserve a little bit sometime as well.